All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Guts and Grind. We are in studio. Super fun, right, Sajan?
So good.
We just interviewed my bride, Sheena Abraham. What are your thoughts?
I think it was, we talked this season all about perspective, right?
Yeah.
And this one, I think any married couple, partners that are a team tandem that's trying to get into real estate, this is a really good balance on how to understand to manage a relationship as it relates to investing.
Yeah, I'm a little biased. But I think we are doing it pretty awesome, guys. No, but seriously, we talk about how do you approach a partner? And it really could be like your spouse, or it could be like a partner that you're trying to team up with to do real estate deals with, right? And so I think we have some pretty good nuggets. It's great to hear her perspective because although she is involved in real estate, it's still me driving the boat. And so there's a lot of feelings of are we doing the right thing? Are we making the right investments? Are we making the right moves, right? And so it's kind of cool to hear her perspective. So for example, if you are a married person and you want your spouse to be on board, it's kind of cool to hear what your spouse might be thinking, right? And so stay tuned to this episode. Anything else you want to share before we dive into the show?
No, really good nuggets, highlights on, how to approach your partner, what best ways to kind of build credibility. We gave a few little nuggets on that. All in all, just good, really good, well-rounded show from a different perspective. It's still real estate based, but a totally different perspective.
The highlight for me was, and again, I'm biased because I said it, but it was like doing your homework. You shouldn't expect your spouse to just get on board. Yeah. Like you should be in a position where you could explain everything to that person and explain it to yourself too, right?
Sell it to them. You have to sell it to them. Put the hard sell, right. Show them you're willing to do the work and sell it to them.
It shouldn't be like a just trust me type of situation, right?
Absolutely.
And so that's kind of what we touch on. I hope you enjoy it. Let's stop beating around the bush. Let's dive right into the show.
You're listening to Guts and Grind with Siju and Sajan, making the real estate journey accessible to anyone.
Welcome, friends, to another episode of our Guts and Grind podcast. We are here with my co-host, Sajan Abraham.
Hi, everybody.
I'm Siju Koshi, and we have our special guest, Sheena Abraham, Sajan's real-life co-host. How you doing, Sheena?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Thanks for being with us. First off, give us a little bit of background about who Sheena Abraham is, career-wise, where you're at. How long you guys been married? Give us a full scoop.
Okay, so we have been married, I never remember. I don't know, around 15 years.
15 years. 2008 we got married. Why am I the one that only remembers? It's kind of awkward.
When you're here, my brain turns off. I always know you'll know.
Anyway,
so we've been married for a while, and my background is in marketing, publicity, public relations, that kind of thing. So I've done a lot of writing, raised millions of dollars, and now I have my own business and I do sales writing for other businesses.
Very nice, very nice. So in this episode, obviously we're a real estate podcast. The goal of this episode is really to kind of see how our partners or spouses, or it may be a hurdle for people to kind of, say, hey, get a buy-in from their partner on real estate. So how did Saj introduce real estate or this concept of investing in real estate to Sheena?
Before that, was it me, or was there something in your past that you gave, got exposure to it? What did it look like?
Yeah, so I'll share a little bit of background. My family, we grew up in North Shore. We lived in 2 houses there. And so when we moved out of the first house, my parents rented that out. So I got to see them go through the process of finding a tenant, dealing with hoarders and people not paying rent, and having to drive 45 minutes to check up on the house, things like that. And then when we moved out of our 3rd house, my mom and the buyer did a creative financing deal. I had some exposure to that growing up. And then when we got married, Sajan made it really clear, hey, real estate is really important to me. I think he was such a long-term thinker, and that was just something he couldn't get off his mind. It was a simple plan. It was, hey, let's live somewhere for a couple of years and then move out and then live somewhere else a couple of years. And I'm the type of person, I'm very detached. I'm not I just need to live in this house I'm not, what's that word? I'm not sentimental. So I was yes, I love change. Let's move all the time.
And I think that was a huge benefit for me, at least, because she knew that I was locked in on hey, the first house, instead of moving into an apartment, let's just have an affordable home, eventually turning that into a rental property, right? Because she doesn't have that attachment of like, oh, but we had our first memories here of this and that and blah, blah, blah. Like it wasn't there. And so it made it so much easier but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And I think like everybody has a money story. Like, what's your money mindset? How did you grow up around money? For me, as a child, my money story is I will never have money. I remember when I got a sticker at school, I would save it because I was like, I don't know when I'll get another one. Or I answered a question, I got a candy corn, I would put it in my pocket. I didn't know when I would get another one. So much of my life was penny pinching and knowing money was finite. I almost found pleasure in not spending money. And so I think one way that it worked for us was that it was very calculated and there was no get rich quick. It was get rich slow. And there was a level of consistency and frugality involved. And that kind of vibed with how I was with money. If it were like, let's get rich quick, let's throw a lot of money into investments, money that we don't have, margin that we don't have, that would have been a problem for me.
That's interesting you say that because I think that a lot of that is like our culture driven, right? Because I never had any perspective. I could tell you our parents never had any perspective of like what money is, things like that. It was more of like, we barely have enough, right? It's the mindset they just kind of taught us on, right? They never taught us on, hey, how to handle money properly. It was more of like, yeah, save everything that you have, right? So as a kid, I could see how your mindset's like, we need to save everything we need, you know, like that cupcake, I got to save it. You know, I don't know when I'll get another cupcake. Right. So that's a mindset. I think that's a cultural mindset. Sure. And it's kind of interesting because I'll be curious to see what our kids say about us, right? You know, 10, 15 years from now, you know, because I don't think they have that essence of like, you know, frugality. It's more of like they get whatever they want.
Yeah. I do have to say, I think so. My money story changed because I realized I had lost so much money penny pinching and that I had to invest the right amount in the right places so I could stop living like a martyr. And that's what appealed to me. So I feel like our kids have a disadvantage in that they're not used to penny pinching, but they have an advantage in that they'll know how to be future oriented and put money in the right places.
I think it's a mindset of our parents' generation. They just had to be frugal. Like they didn't have the option of being like, let's just be lavish and do whatever and quote unquote throw away money, right? And so we saw that, and I think that was a good stepping stone for us to say, this is what hard work looks like. And so our job is to understand what hard work looks like, and then we have to say, how do we make it smarter? How do we, work smarter to couple that together to really find success? Yeah. So I think it was a benefit. And Sid, what you were saying about what our kids, I have no idea. Yeah. I don't know what it's going to look like.
I think every generation has their story, right? Like, that generation was the migration generation, right? So again, like Sajan said, they had to struggle, right, for us. And now we can build off of that struggle and maybe free it up for our kids. And now I think, honestly, our kids should have a better frame of reference of planning for, like you said, long-term wealth. Figure out how to manage it and manage your money right. Speaking on that, out of you two, who handles the finances at the household, the Abraham household?
So the way it works is Sajan will pay most of the bills. There's a couple things that I handle, and he'll send that to me, and then I'll put it in a spreadsheet. I think since the beginning of our marriage, we have like all of our bills documented, and then I would look at it and kind of do percentages, like how much are we spending in this area or that area. So I kind of do the big overview, and then he has the systems going and make sure that money goes where it's supposed to. So I think what's been really important for us is that we both have our eyes on the finances. It's not like I'm like, well, that's Sajan's area. There's a lot of like ongoing conversation about money strategies. What do we do next? What can we handle right now?
And I think the reason for that is because, growing up, Dad took care of all the finances and Mom didn't really know what was going on. Like they both worked, they both contributed, but it was just what it was. And we got married, I was thinking, man, if I get hit by a bus and something happens, like there still needs to be the system has to still roll, right? And so like what Sheena was saying is like, I might receive the bills and pay them all and stuff like that. But we just have an email. We just send an email to each other and say, hey, these are the bills that we paid this month. She puts it out into a spreadsheet, and like, it's just organized, and it's just an opportunity for us to both have our finger on the pulse. And that was really the purpose for it. Just so we're all on the same page. We know what's going where. So I would say we both are like, even though I'm the one actually physically making the payments, we're still both involved because there's always conversations about it.
It's nice because it takes the burden off of either of us to like say, well, that's not my area, right? I feel like that would cause an imbalance that would make the real estate discussion harder.
Yeah. And I think it's very important as a team is what you have to kind of to focus it on, right? The right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing. That's kind of where disagreements and everything else stem from, right? And early on, I know that, you know, if you guys do it as a team, it's like the hardest thing to get over, right? So speaking on that, so you guys, you have a little bit of background in real estate. Kind of sounds like Sajan did too, like early on. Family had some rental properties. So it wasn't as hard as sell. And the reason why I kind of like to bring it up is, you know, every partner has to be sold a different way. Like my wife is a numbers girl, right? So if you're going to give her an investment project, we have to give her the full numbers and see what's the profitability. I have to kind of sell it to her in a certain way, right? And so what is something that you would give to our viewers as far as if they're struggling with, hey, the husband wants to do real estate and they need to sell it to their partner? Like what's the best way or best avenue?
You know what I've seen some really good money influencers talk about? The strategy that I've noticed to get people to think about money a certain way is you talk about what do you want for your future? What do you want for your future? And then how do you fund it? Otherwise, it's like you would just avoid the money conversation. Well, I don't have to talk about it because it's not going to do anything for me. So I feel like because we both want certain things for the future, at this point in life, it helps to be able to talk about real estate and look at the numbers.
Can I interject? Going back to the topic of both of us being involved in finances, I think that set the pace to be able to even have the conversation, kind of like what Sheena was saying, is like she already knew what was coming in and what was going out. And so like when I said, hey, you know, what if we sell this house, move to the next one and rent this one out? It wasn't this big hurdle of like, well, let me show you what the numbers look like. Let me show you what's in our savings account. Let me show you how much money we have left after we pay all our bills and stuff. Like I didn't have to show her any of that stuff because she's intimately involved in that already. And so I think that helps. So having some kind of foundation before you try to dive into something big is crucial.
I also think we talk a lot. So, and when we talk, we say, oh, I wonder what would happen if we did this, or what about that? And even sometimes there are like houses he's really interested in that he wants to buy, where I'm like, I don't know if that's a good idea financially, but he gets the opportunity to like pursue it as much as he can. And then in the process learns what works and what doesn't. And I didn't have to burst his bubble. So I think having the conversation and entertaining ideas gets us farther each time rather than not even wanting to try because we're scared of an idea that we haven't even tested.
If Sajan finds a deal today, does he just bring it to you and says, hey, Sheena, look at this shiny house. I want to buy this house. Is that what he does? Or does he show you the numbers?
He'll send me the house. He'll send me the house. And then he has a really cool spreadsheet where he puts in like what are the numbers that he knows of and what are the estimates and then what's the ROI? Like what's the value that we'll get out of it? So I know he's very calculated. He's not trying to take some big money risk to feel cool. It's like profit is the goal.
Yeah.
If it's just for fun, I'll send her a house. Like, you know, I'm on HAR and be like, hey, look at this thing. For fun. But when it comes down to like the nuts and bolts of like, hey, we're trying to get an investment going, then it's really that spreadsheet thing where it's like, hey, I'm considering this as a potential, you know, purchase for investment. What do you think? Like, here's all the numbers. It's like I do all my homework on the front end and then present it to her because like it's a partnership, right? And so I don't want her to feel like whatever you say, because I don't want that either. I want someone to be involved, just like working with the bank. It's not fun to process all the paperwork and all that kind of stuff like that, but they're giving you 80% of the loan. So they're going to do their homework. And so once they're doing their homework and they feel comfortable with it, then I feel like, oh man, I feel that much more comfortable knowing that I can move forward with this project. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's the same thing with Sheena. It's like, all right, I think that this is a winner. So Sheena, what do you think? And then she'll look at the numbers from a different angle, from a different point of view and say, yeah, these numbers make sense. Or no, what about this? And I'm like, oh, I didn't see that. You know, I feel like her as a partner is the same as like working with my realtor, working with the bank, things like that, where there's all these people that you're checking with. And if they say yes and she says yes and he says yes, then it's like that much more assurance of knowing that, hey, this is a solid deal.
Yeah. Transparency is key, right? Like, I mean, you know, me and my wife talk about this all the time too. I feel like the guys have and I don't want to sound like I'm sexist or anything.
Here we go.
I feel like the guys have like the pie in the eye, you know, sky ideas, right? We're the dreamers,
Sure.
right? We're the gals are the one that'll chin check you in the mouth and just say, you're an idiot. You know?
Yeah. Or bring it back to reality.
Or
right?
bring you back to reality and say, you know, hey, maybe not that high.
Yeah.
Maybe this high, you know?
Yeah.
So
I did have to learn, you know, they say some people are the what people and some people are that, well, how are we going to do it? He's the what, like he knows what he wants to do. I'm like, well, how are we going to do that?
Yeah.
So I think I learned like, this is just let him dream and then let him figure it out sometimes.
Right.
Absolutely.
But I think the process of dreaming and figuring it out, it's necessary. Like even like you were saying, like she brings you back to reality. Like we need that, because then you just float out into outer space and not really know why did we do what we did, you know? And so you need that checks and balances and stuff. So dreaming is good, but putting it down on paper and having to present it to somebody makes it even realer, right? Because then you're that much closer to actually like pulling the trigger and, you know, acquiring a property or whatever it might be.
It's interesting because we have to think about, okay, do we buy a really nice house for ourselves or do we keep investing in more property? So you have to keep battling what's important to us at this moment in time, or think about, okay, well, we only have X amount of years with our kids. Should we do dream house now while we can before they're out of the house? So all of those things are just discussions.
So speaking of, what are your thoughts on that? What would you, if you're prioritizing investment, and I'm speaking, only reason I'm asking is if there's people that are listening that are debating, right? So should I buy a next big house for myself or should I invest? Like, what's your thoughts on that? I'm sure everybody's different, but what's Abraham, view on that?
Personality and preferences matter. I'm an experiences person. I don't need the big dream house. I just want us to have quality time together. So for us, let's invest in getting out of the house together. I want to build up a good retirement egg. So I'm all about keep investing in those houses. But if Sajan's like, oh, it's important to me that we have this nice house and we can have more people over. We love hosting people. Then that's something to consider too. I think we're still in that conversation, but I lean toward get them investment properties.
It's a plus for me because, there's no roadblock into saying, hey, a more investment property? Yeah, go for it, right? But like what you said before, like our kids are a certain age right now, and after a few years, they're going to be gone, right? And so, I mean, the house we're in now is fine. It's great. And the idea of let your investments pay for your lifestyle. And so we're doing that. And I feel like now we're at a point where maybe we should like upgrade, right? But I don't know. It's just one of those things where like we're happy. It's fine.
And the market's not welcoming right now.
Yeah, I feel like the market's making the decision for us, right? Like, let's just stay home, let's just stay here. And if we find a good investment, we'll go for it. So it is a conversation that's still being had. Like, so she's into experiences and quality time together. I'm into that too, but I do want like, oh man, a nicer house would be cool. Because just like what you said, like being able to host people, things like that. But it's a tug of war, man. Because like for me internally, I'm like, oh man, I want more investments because that's going to not only float us for our future, but even for the right now, like the small trickle of money that's coming in as our cash flow, like that's still helpful. It's still nice.
Yeah, it's a battle that we have as well. Again, it's, do we have that nice house? In my head, what brings me back is that what the kids will remember, right? Kids, before you know it, they're going to hit high school and they're out, you know, and they got their own friends and boom, there's your time for experiences. So that's where I'm kind of battling and I'm like, do I want to be, house poor or, you know what I mean? And have the nice house and not be able to go anywhere with it. So yeah, it's all good points. The other thing I was going to ask you is like, is there anything that you worry about hindsight? Knowing that where you're at now, you're heavily invested in real estate, you're making, decent moves in those kind of markets. Is there anything you worry about? Is there that sits in the back of your head that you tell Sajan as a partner of somebody that's investing? That's like a different perspective that you could think of.
That I worry about regarding
real estate investing, Is there any kind of stress in the back of your head, hindsight, now that you're in it?
I think now that we're in it for this long, like enough time has passed, we realize how good it is. A lot of people, a few people will say, invest in the stock market, right? It's going to go up. You're going to get gains no matter what. You can make a lot of money. We actually we compared the market versus real estate. And for us, right, we found that real estate performed better. I mean, we diversified our, income streams a little bit, but it's cool that looking in hindsight, we can see that because I'm the type where I'm like, let's get in that stock market. Let's get some of that game. Yeah. So I think my concern is beating inflation and like being ready for what's coming. I'm like, we have to invest more because if we keep our dollars, they're just stuck. They're going to get smaller.
Right. And it's like the comparison. And it could be different for other people, like based off of what you're contributing in, whatever it might be, right? But when we looked at our exposure to the stock market and our exposure in real estate, the real estate exposure is doing significantly better, And so that's why, we had time on our side. We have the benefit of time to be able to look back and say, all right, X amount of years have passed. What is good? What is bad, right? But I would say early on, I don't know if you felt this way, but like even any investor would feel, what if the AC goes out? What if these big major hiccups happen? And, like, what do you do, right? So that would be a word. I don't know if it was a word for you, but that was a word for me. I knew like, hey, we got to figure it out, keep going. And we figured it out and we kept going, right? Like everything is figure outable, but that is a concern, right? But we hedged those concerns with savings, right?
Yeah, that was something for me. Like I would think of every worst case scenario because there's the foundation, the AC, and the roof. Are we ready for those things to go wrong on any house or multiple houses? Can we cover the rent for 6 months when someone's not in a house or multiple houses? Those were definitely concerns. Can we trust the people that are fixing the house if we're not there? Like there are a lot of unknowns.
Absolutely. That's what I was kind of expecting. I'm surprised you didn't say it early on, but because I worry about that still to this day. But here's the other thing too. If you run your numbers right, like we said earlier, right? So if you're presenting the numbers, if you look at a deal and you know there's enough skin in the game to cover these costs, right? I mean, who knows? Look at Maui, you know, like, I mean, it could burn like nothing happened, right? Like that's been a paradise forever, right? So, you know, things like that are inevitable in some senses, right? Like we're in Hurricane Alley, you know, and every time my birthday comes around, I'm like, oh my God, like, you know, it's a stress in a different way. Yeah, floods. So,
I'm like, I mean, how much do we have flood insurance?
Absolutely. And even if your property's in an area where it's not required, those areas got hit. You know, and it's so hard to say, and they're all valid. But again, like I said, it's all, as long as you're prepared in some way with insurance and this and that, really, you got to just take it with a grain of salt. Honestly, you know, it's the ride.
You're totally right. And I think it's one of those things where it's like, you don't know. And so all you could do is just prepare for the worst. And so as long as you're preparing by having some kind of reserves, then what else can you really do, right?
Yeah,
what else can you really do? And so fortunately, major things didn't happen when we didn't have reserves. And when we did have reserves, we're able to cover what we needed. And then we set systems in place. And as we grow, we're setting more systems in place to make it happen, you know?
Yeah. I think it took me a while to answer your question about the concerns, because I think I've gotten to the point where I see, like, you know, there are a lot of inconveniences. Like even watching him before we had a property manager, watching Sajan manage the houses and the stress of that, like getting calls all the time and you know, hearing lots of things from tenants. I think now I've learned like, oh, that's the cost of doing business. And if you're willing to pay that cost, you get the return. So I think it's less of a concern for me because I'm like, oh, now I know to expect it, but you're getting a payoff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also kind of like any other job that you might have, right? You work at a 9-to-5 job, you're taking on someone's headache, but you're getting paid for that headache, right? And so it's the same thing with investments. Like you're taking on a headache. Oh, the toilet broke and I got to go fix it. Or there's an electrical issue. Let me call the electrician, blah, blah, blah. All these things happen. Yes, those are headaches. Those are real, but you're getting paid for it. Not only are you getting paid for it, like your investment's growing, all that kind of stuff. But not everyone sees it that way. So I think it takes time, right? For people to actually see it.
Yeah. Cause I was thinking, why didn't that come up first for me? Cause even now, like with me having a business way years ago when I started freelancing, I would freeze because there were all these new skills of I have to like ask somebody for money, and what if they don't like what I do? And so, you know, sometimes I had unpleasant experiences and it would make me freeze and stop for a few years. And then now I realize like, I don't care. Like, yes, it is going to happen and it doesn't matter because all the good stuff that's going to happen is what really matters. That's what's going to make me money. I think of real estate that way as well.
It's like in anything, like you said, there's going to be the ups and downs for everything. It's life, right? And it's just...
We're over that hump.
And I think that's early on. I will say the stress early on is a lot more in the real estate investing side. Once you get comfortable and you scale, you have a little bit of room to make a little bit more mistakes, right? Because hopefully you're hedging a little bit more profits and things like that. Yeah. From an education perspective, sounds like you're pretty well versed in real estate. Do you read anything? Does Sajan bring this stuff to you?
So real estate is really Sajan, right? I remember in the beginning we would refinance houses. I would do it because I trusted him, but that was kind of a problem for me because I was not about debt. And we would go sign off on this refinance. I would read every page because I'm like, you know, I need to know what I'm doing.
You know what the closings look like, right?
Oh yeah, it's a REMA paper.
So I'm sitting there like, sign the paper. Let's keep going, right? Like but I mean, to be fair, it is a big deal. And especially when your mindset is stuck of like, debt's bad, right? And if we're seeing debt as bad and I'm restarting the clock on our debt.
Yeah. Right? So I would look at him and be like, hold on. We spent all these years paying,
Yeah.
even overpaying this mortgage, and we are signing this document
Yeah.
to start all over again for 30 years.
That is correct.
So that is antithetical. That is antithetical to anything I knew about money at the time. So I didn't know that. I didn't know much about real estate at all. I learned from what he was doing. I do read books about money, and so now I love talking about money. But I think that was partly fostered because early on, he was so systematic about how we manage money.
Sure.
Hindsight for me, like real estate and association of debt, like debt is bad, obviously. You don't want to have bad debt. There's scales of debt. Like there's good and bad debt, you know?
Yeah.
Like this is a debt that can build you wealth over time. And I love like teaching that lesson.
Yeah.
It's insane, but like it takes forever to learn. It took me 40 years to learn this
Yeah,
thing, you know? But like
exactly.
now this is how in this capitalistic world, this is where the wealthy get wealthy. And so it's amazing because it's crazy. But now you said it ahead in the beginning of the podcast. It's don't leave the money in the bank account because you're losing money.
Exactly.
It's crazy, which is what we were averse from culturally
Right.
when we were raised up. It was save all the money you can get.
My brain could not pick up, only until recently could my brain understand. Like I'd heard that so many times, don't leave money in the bank. I did not know what it meant. I just couldn't understand it. And the whole like debt, mortgage debt, I could
Yeah.
not understand it.
But it's also like, it's what society tells us. It's what our families tell us. And it's not like ill will or anything like that where, oh, let's hold this person down and say, pay off your mortgage and stuff like that. Like it's all good intentions, right? Because we're all trained to think debt is bad and we have to erase it as soon as
Yeah.
possible. And so it is a hurdle. I mean, that's a hurdle for a lot of people to sit there and say like, we're going to start the clock again on our 30-year mortgage. Why? You know what I mean? Like it's understandable to question that, you know?
Even more than that, you may have a debt on that property forever.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's okay to have that as long as you know what the end goal is, right? Like, as long as you know when you turn 80, all you plan on doing is selling and taking this profits out of it,
Yeah.
right? So as long as you know that, it's having a mind of futuristic thinking
Yeah.
and make sure you understand it's not a short-term game, right? This is not a quick ping pong game, you know? This is a long 10-inning baseball
Right,
game, you
exactly.
know?
our $150,000 house will probably have paid $1 million or more for it by the time it.
When we say that, we pay, let's say the first house is 150 and at the end of all of it, we paid $1 million, but it's not we that paid it, right?
Yeah.
Because that's a common thing to feel, right? It's like, man, we have a 30-year mortgage that we restart every X amount of years. But what are we doing with that money once we restart it, right? And so like, it's a hurdle.
Yeah.
I'm fortunate because Sheena's willing to process the thought with me, right? I feel like there's a lot of people out there when they're trying to talk to their spouse about it, they're like, nope, this is, my parents taught me this, that we need to erase debt. And so we're going to erase debt.
That's a good segue. What would you tell somebody that's struggling with that? How would you get them over that mindset? Like, what do you think is a good segue to kind of get them across that line? If one partner wants that investment property, they want to get it so bad, right?
Yeah.
They're listening to Guts and Grind podcast and they want to grind in that real estate field, right? What would you do to get them across that line?
I think there's a lot of homework that needs to happen before you kind of say, hey, I'm going to take $50,000 from our bank account, roll the dice, right? Like what we said before, like there was a lot of background work that we've done. Like I had to prove, not to say I had to prove to her, but I proved to her that I am financially smart. I'm not
Agreed.
just throwing away money, right? Like you saw what car I drove. You saw how I dress.
It was a mindset. It was a lifestyle. It's not a one-time question. Oh, let's
Yeah.
go invest.
I
And
agree.
so I think the problem is like when someone just kind of goes to their spouse, whether it's the wife to the husband or husband to wife, and say, I want to invest in real estate. Like that's unfair for you to just ping it on somebody and say, hey, I'm going to take this money, our money, and use it on real estate. And I don't care how you feel about it.
And if you say no, it's your fault.
And
We
it's-
can't
like
invest.
that's super unfair, right? So there needs to be a few, I would say years, but maybe a few months of you showing like, hey, here's what our finances look like. Here's what we're doing. Here's how we're saving. This is why we're saving. Look at all these systems that I put in place. And this is how I want to implement that for real estate. And this is what real estate's going to do for us once we get the ball rolling, right? So the earlier on you could do that, the better it is for everybody, because that way you have a little bit more, you have buy-in from your spouse. You have time on your side to prove your methods. You could even like do a mock-up of, let's say we buy this property and we're going to trace this property. Oh, this is how much the rent it'll take and blah, blah, blah. You could really map it out to explain it to somebody. Like, I think the key is like, even when I asked her to be my girlfriend or whatever, right?
She
Like,
said no.
She said multiple times.
I did. It's true.
Multiple times she said no. But it's persistence, right? Proving myself to say, and I think it's the same thing with real estate. You have to prove yourself that you're worthy enough to do this. Be someone that's worthy enough to follow, right? And
Absolutely.
so I felt like I painted the picture and proved myself by way of this is how I handle my personal finances. This is how we're handling our personal finances. And we lived in that first house for 2-ish years. So in 2 years, we got comfortable enough to say, hey, we're going to pull the trigger. We're going to move and make this a rental. And that was kind of but it took 2 years of like showing the ropes and saying, hey, this is what I'm thinking. This is where my mind's at.
I agree with you. I think you can't be somebody that has no savings, that's overspending,
Right.
and then go to his wife and say, hey, by the way, I want to buy another house for us.
Right.
She'll probably backhand you.
Yeah. Rightfully so.
Rightfully so,
Yeah.
right? So it's about building credibility,
Exactly.
right? And building that credibility that you know what you're doing with the money before you deploy it and make it work for you, right? And I was listening to another podcast that kind of mentioned husband-wife interaction. Same thing. Husband wanted to buy investment property. Wife was not on board with it. Every day he would listen to these podcasts. He would take clips of the podcast, literally, just clips, just bits and clips that would make sense for her, and just send it to her. Hey, listen to this.
Yeah.
Just listen to this, right? And he was obviously financially sound, but she wasn't sold about the concept. So
yeah, he had to educate me for sure. For sure.
It's not even just educating you. You're proving it to yourself as well.
Yeah.
Because these are just concepts in our minds, right? And so we hear of other people doing it, right? So-and-so did real estate. Oh, they have a rental house. They have 2 or 3 or whatever, right? But I don't really know. I just believed in it so much, right? And so I have to prove it to myself, prove it to you, and then we together work together and make it happen.
He
right?
needs your acceptance. Which is true. Otherwise, it's like I said, it's like the right hand not talking to the left hand. And you need to get this done together. Worst case, if something happened to the house, that's going to fall. The stress is going to fall on the guy that wants to do it. And then the other person is going to be like, I didn't agree to this.
Yeah.
And that's the worst case.
That causes a lot of tension, right? So even for that example, what do you do when something bad happens, right? Like to have that conversation, how does it look like?
Plan ahead.
Being able to plan ahead and trying to figure out hey, this is what we will do. With real estate, I feel very confident about it because we could just sell the property, right?
Yeah.
But that could be an answer, right? You have to be able to be in a position to answer the questions, the fears that your spouse might have, right?
What's the worst that could happen?
And if
Because they
that's
probably will.
Exactly. If that's a genuine fear of your spouse, shouldn't you have the ability to answer that?
Yeah.
And if your answer is, I don't know, then you should probably go back to the drawing board. You yourself as the one that wants to invest, you should figure it out. Be able to be in a position to answer that question, right?
So Sheena, segueing off that, what are some of the tensions that real estate have brought? Or has there been anything that kind of stressed the relationship out with this kind of investment style?
I think just knowing our debt and keeping an eye on it has been important to me. Always calculating and having a plan to pay things off or decide if we're going to pay things off.
Yeah. I don't feel that there was much stress, but I don't know if I'm blind to it. You know what I mean? If I'm just kind of
blind,
because we are over communicators.
Yeah.
We even have systems in the way we communicate. Every beginning of every week, either one of us pings an email to each other saying, this is what's going on this week on my schedule. You add to what's yours, right? Whenever we have bills, every month we send out a bill hey, these are all the bills that we paid. And so it's a tickler for conversation.
There's no surprises. That's what it is. And I know what's happening. It's not like my eyes are closed or my ears are closed. He tells me everything that's happening with the houses. I can tell you about each one, what's been going on.
Right.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Same. Early on, I think it was kind of tough, but you have to allow them.
Yeah.
Or pay them the respect to do that, to at least, make them feel comfortable, let them see. It also shows a struggle to the other partner. What kind of struggle that it's not easy in managing property and
not at
kind
all.
of, and so if they see that stress, they see you're building towards something, you're working hard towards something, I think it's truly fruitful for the team.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's really what it is. Imagine it as a business, right? And you want your team members to believe in you as the lead, right? And if you're leading the team, don't they deserve to know what's going on? Don't they deserve to be intimately involved in all the inner workings of it because they benefit from it as well? So I view it as that. It's a partnership. It's not just hey, can I have permission to buy this house? Can you just believe in me? That's all sweet and whatever, but I don't think that's the right approach.
Yeah.
Because I think the approach should be you have to be in a position to prove it to the world, right? And so that's the way I view it.
There's always tension in the unknowns at any given time, but what helps relieve that is just we're always strategizing and wondering together, oh, what if we do this? What if we do that? And kind of, dream together.
It helps a relationship I mean, at the end of the day, if you think about it, right, you guys are, like you said, at the very least, forced to communicate, right, on something that hopefully you both kind of like managing, and then it kind of keeps the relationship rolling too, right? Like, because these are the things you're trying to find commonality. So I think it's a benefit. If you leave it open, I love it. You know, it's good. It's good you guys are kind of handling it that way.
Yep.
Any final thoughts? Sheena, great a session, a lot of insight. Or even Sajan, any questions to your wife?
I can't think of any question, but did you have any final thoughts?
I feel like, so we're over the hump, so now we can talk about it all rosy and stuff, but it seems like the key things are what you said earlier, like establishing credibility between each other and having consistency and systems just takes away from that stress, and having some sort of planned margin, knowing the worst that could happen and planning for it. All of that builds a good system together.
Yeah, and going back to systems, like there's sometimes when waves come and she's like, are we saving enough? Are we doing this? Or, you know, she'll have these questions, right? It happens not frequently, but it happens, right? And so I'm like, go back to the system, like see what we're doing and tell me if you're comfortable or not. And we could tweak it if we need to. But every time when you go back to the system, you start realizing, oh yeah, we are planning for this.
So there are times when I will panic about money. I'll think, oh man, we're going out to eat, but couldn't we use that money for something else? I'll just worry if we have enough or if we're doing enough. And so that's when we'll just talk and figure it out and look at the numbers.
The mindset of like, let's pay ourselves first, as opposed to, so we have systems in place to where we pay ourselves first, and so that way we know, hey, we can spend this much and live a good life and have fun and still know that we're saving money, right? And so I know that because I'm actually the one, like I set up the system, and so I feel comfortable with it. So it's fair. It's fair that she might say like, hey, did we do this, or what are we doing in that? And so as time progresses, we, you know, go back to the system and kind of figure out like, hey, what are we doing? Like, what are we tucking away?
Because I'll think, could we be investing more? Well, what if we want to retire with even more? Now is the time.
So for me, the system provides balance to where I'm not stealing from today Sajan to fund tomorrow's Sajan, but I also want to make sure we're funding tomorrow's Sheena and Sajan, right?
Yeah, my key word of the year or life, and you can ask my wife, Sheena, she'll tell you it's balance.
Sure.
You know, everything, really, if you ask any question, I could say balance. You know? And really, and truly, it really is, because, again, at our age, we're middle age, focusing on retirement, and, you know, these are the things that are kind of sitting in our head. Because I always worried about it. I say, hey, do we have enough money in our 401k, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we touched on that a little bit, right? You never know, right? I mean, economies, the way it's going, the way inflation's happening. I think Sheena kind of mentioned that, you know, it's not the economy that our parents grew up on. So as long as we're doing our due diligence and you're smart enough to understand, you know, where to invest, diversify, I think read up and education. That's the biggest thing, right? Like staying on top of what's happening in the world, in your environment. I just have to keep telling myself, hey, we're doing a good job, right? And I think we're all educated enough to kind of say that, hey, we're doing the best that we can.
Yeah, no, for sure. But at the same time, I think having those mid-year or end-of-year reviews is still good, right? Because like you said, our parents' economy is different from today's economy, right? And so just like that, like our 20s economy is different from our 30s economy, from our 40s economy, right?
Absolutely.
We're making different types of money. We're doing different types of things. And so it's good to reset and kind of figure out like, hey, what are we doing? Are we still on track to the goals that we want to achieve, right?
Absolutely. Great conversation. I'm super excited about this episode. I think a lot of viewers, at least that are married, who can at least leverage from, you know, some of the things that they may have hurdles wise to get into investing in real estate, things like that. So thank you again. Any final thoughts? Are you good to go?
I think uncertainty and headaches are always an issue, but just it's a calculated payoff.
Absolutely. That's life. You have to have a little uncertainty in life to keep it exciting, right?
That's right. You know, we went through this whole podcast and we never introduced the fourth person on the podcast. Russell's been
this
here.
guy?
He was actually supposed to be the interviewee, but he wouldn't talk, so I stepped in.
That's right.
Russell, the love muscle.
If you made it this far, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with us and watching. Make sure you subscribe, like this, share it with your friends, and also comment, because we want to have a conversation, right? Like we want to be able to talk to you guys. If you have any questions for Sheena, maybe we'll have some contact information in the show notes. And with that said, thanks for watching.
Take care, guys.
Thanks for listening to Guts and Grind with Siju and Sajan. Be sure to tune in next time.